Okay, y'all. I'm not going to make this very long. The Resident Evil Netflix series season 1 came out on Thursday. I tried to do a reaction video on the first episode, just like the whole first episode and only that episode, at the time when it came out. Needless to say, um, Netflix butchered my video from copyright claims, and then literally, no matter what I do, it won't appease the copyright gods. So fuck it. Like, I'm done trying to mess with that video. I'm not going to do any more reaction videos to anything ever. But I'm just going to talk about it, which is unfortunate because there were a lot of visual aids and things to talk about. So most of the publications, and I use that term lightly, like GameSpot or whatever, have given the show actually pretty high ratings. They've said things like it's the most um, authentic Resident Evil adaptation to date, or it's at least like the closest thing to date. So after watching the whole series, I actually don't entirely disagree. Um, there's certainly some really bad stuff in the series. There's a lot of really bad camera work, and I'm not sure that it was like uh, the result of being a bad director so much as the result of kind of just mimicking what's been done in film, you know, across the industry. There's a lot of snore cam shots. Not really. There's not a lot. There's like three. If you don't know what a snore cam is, that's when the actor is wearing like a body rig with a camera attached to it, and it's pointed directly at their face, or sometimes it's like behind them and it's following them through the scene, as if you're playing a third person shooter or something. Regardless, those shots are bad, and personally, I would prefer that they just disappear entirely from filmmaking because they just look stupid. They look like the director's trying to be cool, and they're not cool. They're bad. Um, and you would have to watch something to know what I mean. Like you'd have to have watched Our World War or Lost or this show or something that uses them. Um, in the first episode alone, there's like three very specific ones, but you never see them again, like the entire show. So I don't understand. Maybe the first episode was just directed by someone else or something. That's not really important, but there are also a lot of really stupid cliche shots that made their way into the show, like. I digress. It's not the fact that the shots themselves, the camera work, made it into the show. It's just the fact that it's all been done before in the Resident Evil Hollywood movies. So there's a lot of shots like the main character at one point leaps off of like a 50-foot castle wall into a crowd of zombies, which happened multiple times in the Mila Jovovich films. What else? There's a lot of like establishing shots with helicopters flying over giant crowds of zombies. Again, not a lot of shots, I guess, but a few shots. And again, that's all in the first episode. Like, I honestly think like the first episode is probably the worst episode, but then the first four episodes are probably also the worst part of the whole season. It's only 8 episodes long, and it kind of seems to be that way in all modern shows that have been released in the past couple of years. Like the first two or three, or even the first half of the season is just dumb, and then everything gets crammed into the last four episodes. So Lance Reddick is basically the only canon Resident Evil character in the show. He plays Albert Wesker. there's also Dr. Evelyn Marcus, who is the CEO of Umbrella. So, without spoiling a whole lot, the show is actually kind of like a sequel to the Resident Evil games. It takes place 2022, at least the modern day part does. And they actually have like shoehorned the story into the canon in a way. And again, without revealing too many details, it makes sense. Um, the problem is the story doesn't have anything to actually do with Resident Evil so much as it does the two main characters. Really, the one main character, because you don't even see the other one until uh, the seventh episode out of 8 episodes. At least you don't see her in the modern day timeline. Oh, and that's another thing about the show. It constantly cuts back and forth between the modern day timeline and the past timeline, which they did entirely, I guess, to try to tell a story that doesn't really need to be told. Again, like in the last 4 episodes, the show gets way better, and they cut down a lot on the flashbacks. It starts to stick to one timeline at a time. Because in the first episode, they are literally switching between past and present every other scene. And then eventually it starts to get like 10 minutes or 15 minutes at a time, or at least multiple scenes at a time in one timeline. And then it goes to the other one. So they've included a lot of Resident Evil game lore. Not just necessarily as references, but it's actually part of the story. And some of it is not for the better. So there's a lot of lore kind of included from Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 5, and Resident Evil 6 is really the main ones. And Wesker's report. And again, I don't want to spoil for anyone who cares for some reason, but there are some like neat plot developments. I don't know that they really matter. In the end, I wouldn't say it was as terrible as a lot of people are claiming. I certainly wouldn't call it a good Resident Evil show, but it's not as terrible as I expected. We'll put it that way. Here's the main problem: the story barely has anything to do with Resident Evil, and I said all this in my reaction video. Unfortunately, you can't put it in the setting that they did and really still accomplish like the same themes. They did do a good job though of trying, but Resident Evil, the game, and the story of the game so far, or at least not so far. I'm sorry, until like Resident Evil Code Veronica, we'll put it that way, was a game about basically like government conspiracies, science fiction, genetic engineering kind of stuff, and the ethical problems of I want to say biological warfare and corporations being able to do secret research and make weapons and get away with it. It being in cahoots in the government. And that was all grounded, in like a small town where feasibly a company could get away with destroying an entire town. And people, you may think that's ridiculous, like it's not realistic. But among other examples in the United States, I don't know if you've heard of Centralia, but there was a fire in Centralia was like a coal mining town. That was their main source of industry. And at one point, there was like a fire underground in the mines, like 30 years ago, and it's still burning. And that town it's gone basically. It's just a ghost town. So that kind of shit definitely can happen. I don't know about nuking an entire American city and getting away with it. That's a little bit far fetched, but honestly, I wouldn't. I wouldn't. I wouldn't doubt that it's possible at this point. Uh, the only problem, really, with trying to do the story the way they did is that, like I said, it's a sequel. So they jumped ahead like 24 years from the actual Resident Evil story, and now it's all background stuff. And it's basically like a one giant Easter egg that they keep on referring back to instead of it really having very much to do with the story. And frankly, I'm more interested in hearing that part of the story, the stuff they keep referring to that happened in the past, than I am in the current part of the story. Because the problem is, every single time they do anything with Resident Evil, it always ends up with an apocalypse. And I don't give a shit about what happens after the world ends in the Resident Evil timeline. No one does. It's been done already. We don't care. We don't need to see different takes on post-virus Resident Evil apocalypse, So I would say probably, I would give it like a 6 out of 10. I wouldn't say it's terrible. I definitely wouldn't say it's anywhere near as good as any of these publications are saying. Like GameSpot, I'm pretty sure they gave it a 9 out of 10 for reference. It also, there are some cool little additional Easter eggs besides the story itself. Like there's a part where Moonlight Sonata is involved in solving a puzzle. There's actually like a fair chunk of an episode where they go around solving like old school Resident Evil puzzles, which was probably one of the best parts of the entire season. Anyway, you know what? I thought I was done. I'm actually not, now that I thought about it for a minute off of camera. Just because I read around and I saw that the show's getting like terrible reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, which I would expect, and I don't really care about that. But there's a lot of things I forgot to mention as far as why it deserves to be downvoted. So like I was saying originally with the camera work, there's so much stuff in this show where it seems like they try to like go with trends that don't exist anymore, that aren't cool. Whether it's the giant shots of helicopters flying over zombie crowds, or the main character leaping, 50, 60 feet up into the air and then jumping into a crowd of zombies. There's also like literally every fucking minute of this show is just drenched in hip hop, and not just hip hop, but I don't care that it's hip hop, but unnecessary music. Like the first episode, for sure, like every single scene, there's a song playing in the background. And I'm not talking original soundtrack. I'm talking licensed music. Like there's one entire scene where like there's an entire Billie Eilish song playing. And then every single scene after that basically has to have some kind of accompanying track behind it. Billie Eilish is like the only one that I could recognize, and that's because the subtitles literally said it was Billie. The rest of the shit I never even heard. So, that's another example. I don't know who they're marketing this show or making this show for, but I kind of doubt that Resident Evil fans listen to this music, so I don't know. Maybe Gen Alpha people or something, not the generation that grew up with Resident Evil. And I mentioned the constant time frame switching. That's one thing. There's a lot of, like I said earlier, there's a lot of stuff that's included from like Resident Evil 5 and Resident Evil 6. Um, Accurate stuff. So, for example, at one point they break out of this prison, and one of the characters gets an AK from like the armory or something, and it has a bayonet on the end of it. And then when the action like gets going, you notice that it's basically the exact AK that you use in Resident Evil 6, at least on the Leon sections. Down to the animations even. The guy stabs multiple zombies with the bayonet, just like you would in Resident Evil 6, like the same exact animation. Um, there's a chainsaw guy. He's a human, actually. I'm pretty sure he's a human. There's a big ass chainsaw guy. When they kill him, he falls to the ground exactly the same way that the Magini chainsaw guys fall to the ground in Resident Evil 5 when killed. Um, and I'm trying not to spoil everything. Like I said, there's a lot of fan service stuff from the games. There's giant creatures, a few of them anyway. Um, you've got your zombies, of course. You got lickers. Basically, that's it. There's lickers and zombies. Um, there's the one chainsaw guy. Oh, I'm sorry. You've got the zombie dog, of course, the Cerberus. And then there's a couple others that I'm not going to spoil. Um, those are all decent. So, just to kind of wrap up and recap, because a lot of I've seen other people mention, uh, it's like if you removed like a few specific elements from this show, that it would be something totally different, and it would be totally indistinguishable as a Resident Evil thing. And I think that's completely accurate to say. Like, if you took out probably the words Umbrella, Wesker, and T-Virus, then it wouldn't have anything to do with Resident Evil whatsoever. Unless you mention those words. Then they didn't even get the Umbrella logo right, for example. Not that they need to, but like that's the most basic thing you could have done to get accuracy with the games. And again, like I was saying before, there are a lot of elements that were done well, or at least acceptably. Like there is at least one episode, I think multiple different scenes across different episodes where they're trying to learn stuff, and like at one point, the main character finds a leaked memo from like a previous Umbrella incident. So that's one, and then there's like another one later where they read a file from another incident, and it's all redacted. But the first one is, you can actually read the text on the first one, so you can see what it says, and it's written just like one of the files you would find in the games, talking about like detailing the process of how a guy got infected and what happened, and etc. So I don't want to totally shit on the show because there are some things that it definitely did right and it did pretty well. But I feel like overall they should have shifted the entire focus of the show like back onto the actual Resident Evil lore and then worked from there instead of starting 14 years in the future after everything has already happened and then trying to frame it against the past and not really even explaining the past because the past in the show is still actually 26 years 24 years after the beginning of the story. So like they're starting the story in the middle, not even the middle, like at the 60% mark, and then trying to bullshit their way back and forth the way that you would with Lost or something. And it doesn't work. I think we can determine as a species that likes television that after nearly 20 years since Lost started airing, I think we can determine that it wasn't necessarily the best way to tell a story, especially given that they just started bullshitting after like season 3. They just started fucking with people and not making sense anymore. So if the show does make it to season 2, I really hope it improves. There's nothing they can do about it now. I mean, they shouldn't have started the way they did, but you can't change that unless you just cancel the show and then do a new one, which obviously isn't going to happen. So we'll see. Anyway, that's it for now. I will probably do another Resident Evil video soon, as we all are aware at this point, since my past like 22 out of 23 videos have been Resident Evil. See ya, everybody. Anyway, all that said, if you have a way to check out the show and you're interested, I would. If not, I wouldn't really worry about it. I mean, you're not missing anything. I don't know. Maybe or hopefully there will be a season 2, but who knows? Because they did obviously set it up at the end to have a season 2, and there's some cool stuff that happens in the last episode. So we'll see.